The arrow had gone deep. Thorvald felt the warmth spreading across his ribs before he felt the pain. Blood seeped through the leather straps of his armor, dark and thick, mingling with the rain that had begun to fall like the tears of forgotten gods. His horse had fled hours ago, frightened by the clash of steel and the screams of dying men. Now there was only the forest, dense and indifferent, and the weight of his own body becoming harder to carry with each step. He had left the battlefield as a survivor, not a victor. The ambush had come from nowhere, rival clans settling old debts with fresh blood. Thorvald's company had been scattered like leaves in a storm. Some would find their way home, others would feed the ravens. He still didn't know which fate awaited him. The trees closed in around him, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the grey sky. His breath came in, ragged gasps, each one a blade in his chest. The world tilted, blurred. He gripped a tree trunk to steady himself, leaving a crimson handprint on the bark. His father's voice echoed in his memory. A warrior who cannot stand cannot fight. A warrior who cannot fight is already dead. But Thorvald was not ready to die, not here, not alone. Through the haze of pain and rain, he saw it, a thin column of smoke rising above the treetops. Shelter, perhaps aid, perhaps mercy. He stumbled toward it like a ship drawn to a distant lighthouse, each step a battle against the darkness creeping at the edges of his vision. The cottage appeared suddenly, as if conjured by the forest itself. It was small, built of dark wood and stone, with a thatched roof that sagged slightly under the weight of moss and years. Warm light flickered through the gaps in the shuttered windows. Thorvald's legs gave out at the doorstep. He fell to his knees, then to his side, his hand reaching weakly toward the wooden door. Before we continue this journey, subscribe to the channel and help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Your strength keeps these legends alive. The door opened. Through dimming eyes, Thorvald saw a figure silhouetted against the firelight, a woman tall and still, watching him with an expression he could not read. She did not gasp or cry out. She simply looked at him, as one might look at a wolf caught in a trap, weighing danger against compassion. Then she knelt beside him, her hands cool against his fevered skin, and the world went black. Consciousness returned in fragments. First, warmth, the crackle of fire and the weight of furs covering his body. Then scent, herbs hanging from rafters, wood smoke, something cooking in an iron pot. Finally, pain, sharp and insistent, reminding him he was still alive. Thorvald opened his eyes to a ceiling of rough-hewn beams. He was lying on a bed of straw and furs, near a stone hearth, stripped of his armor and weapons. His torso was wrapped in clean linen bandages, already spotted with old blood. Someone had tended his wounds while he drifted in and out of consciousness. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. The pain flared white-hot across his ribs, forcing a groan from his lips. "You'll tear what I've stitched." The voice was calm, matter-of-fact. Thorvald turned his head and saw her properly for the first time. She was perhaps 30 winters old, with dark hair braided away from a face marked by intelligence and something else. Caution, or perhaps sorrow, worn smooth by time. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, grey and unreadable. She wore simple woolen clothing, dyed the brown of earth and autumn leaves. She moved to his side with a wooden bowl in her hands, kneeling with practiced ease. "Drink, it will help with the pain and the fever." Thorvald studied her face as she lifted the bowl to his lips. The liquid was bitter, herbal, but he drank. His throat was raw with thirst. "How long?" His voice came, out as a rasp. 3 days. "You lost much blood. I wasn't certain you would wake." 3 days. His men, if any survived, would think him dead. The clans would be counting their losses, burning their honored dead. And he was here, in the dwelling of a stranger whose name he did not know. "Why help me?" he asked. She set the bowl aside, her expression unchanged. "Why not? I could be a criminal, a murderer, An enemy of your people, perhaps. She met his eyes steadily. But you were also dying on my doorstep, and I am not in the habit of leaving wounded men to feed the crows, regardless of what they might have done. There was no warmth in her voice, but no coldness either, just a simple statement of fact, as if she had merely followed the natural order of things. Thorvald found this more unsettling than anger or fear would have been. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, just for a moment. "Astrid." "I am Thorvald, son of Bjorn the Ironhand." If the name meant anything to her, she didn't show it. She simply nodded and rose to her feet. "Rest now, Thorvald, son of Bjorn. Your body needs time to heal. We can speak more when you have strength." She moved back to the fire, stirring the pot, leaving him to stare at the ceiling and wonder what twist of fate had brought him to this strange woman's door. The days that followed existed in a haze of fever and healing. Thorvald drifted between waking and sleep, sometimes uncertain which was which. In his fevered dreams, he relived the ambush, the whistle of arrows, the screams of horses, the face of a man he had called friend, as that man drove a blade toward his heart. He woke, gasping, reaching for weapons that weren't there, only to find Astrid's cool hand on his forehead, her voice low and steady, pulling him back from the shadows. "You're safe," she would say. "The fever makes you remember, but you're here now. You're safe." Safe. The word felt foreign. Thorvald had spent his life in his father's hall, surrounded by warriors and the constant preparation for violence. Safety was walls and weapons, guards and alliances. Not this. A simple cottage, a woman living alone, no defenses except distance and obscurity. And yet he was safe. When the fever finally broke on the 5th day, Thorvald woke to find himself weak as a newborn, but clear-minded at last. Astrid was at the hearth, grinding something in a stone mortar. The sound was rhythmic, almost meditative. Morning light filtered through the gaps in the shutters, painting golden lines across the packed earth floor. "You're back," she said without turning around. "I can tell by your breathing." "How long have you been a healer?" Thorvald asked. "Long enough to know when a man stops fighting death and starts accepting life." She brought him broth, rich with herbs and the meat of some small animal. He ate slowly, feeling strength trickle back into his limbs with each swallow. Astrid watched him with that same unreadable expression, neither pleased nor concerned, simply observant. "Your fever broke in the night," she said. "The wound is clean. You'll live if you don't do anything foolish." Define foolish. Trying to leave before you can walk, tearing your stitches, refusing the medicine because it tastes like something died in it. A ghost of something? Humor, perhaps, flickered across her face. Men always do at least one of those things. "You've treated many wounded men?" The ghost vanished. Enough. It was clear she would say no more on the subject. Thorvald finished the broth and settled back against the furs, exhausted by even that small effort. Outside, he could hear the forest, wind in the trees, the distant call of a raven, the rustle of small creatures in the undergrowth. It was so different from the sounds of the hall, the clash of the practice yard, the din of the feast hall, the constant presence of others. "Do you ever get lonely?" he asked before he could stop himself. Astrid was silent for a long moment. When she finally answered, her voice was soft, almost lost beneath the crackle of the fire. "Lonely and alone are not the same thing. I've been surrounded by people and felt more isolated than I ever do." "Here," she glanced at him. "And you, son of a great jarl, raised among warriors and power, do you ever feel lonely?" The question struck deeper than any blade. Thorvald thought of his father's hall, the constant performance of strength, the careful dance of alliances and rivalries. He thought of conversations that were really negotiations, friendships that were really strategic partnerships, the weight of a legacy he had never asked to carry. Every day, he admitted, something shifted in Astrid's expression, a crack in that careful armor, revealing a glimpse of the person beneath. For just a moment, they looked at each other not as healer and patient, not as stranger and stranger, but as two people who understood what it meant to be surrounded by others, yet utterly alone. Then she rose and busied herself with tasks, and the moment passed. But But something had been acknowledged between them, something that would grow in the days to come, silent and inexorable as roots breaking stone. Days passed in a rhythm of sleep and waking, pain and gradual healing. Thorvald watched Astrid as his strength slowly returned. She was a woman of few words and fewer explanations. Each morning she would check his bandages, apply fresh poultices made from plants he didn't recognize, and make him drink her bitter healing draughts. She asked no questions about the battle that had wounded him, the clan he served, or the life he had left behind, and he, in turn, asked little of her. But observation taught him what conversation did not. She lived alone, that much was clear. No husband returned from hunting, no children played near the hearth. The cottage was orderly but sparse, containing only what was needed for survival and nothing more. She kept chickens in a small coop behind the house and tended a garden that had begun to fade with the coming of autumn. She knew the forest intimately, disappearing for hours to gather mushrooms, roots and herbs, always returning before dusk. She was skilled with healing, more skilled than most. The precision of her stitches, the knowledge of which plants would fight infection and which would ease pain, spoke of training that went beyond simple village wisdom. Thorvald had seen battlefield healers work, had watched the wise woman in his father's hall tend the sick and injured. Astrid's knowledge surpassed them all. On the seventh day, Thorvald was strong enough to stand without assistance. He made his way outside while Astrid was gathering water from the nearby stream, needing to feel the sun on his face and wind in his lungs. The cottage sat in a small clearing, surrounded by ancient oaks and pines. Beyond the garden and chicken coop, the forest pressed in close, dark and mysterious. He found himself examining the dwelling with a warrior's eye for detail. The woodpile was neatly stacked and covered against rain. The thatch roof, though old, was well maintained. A small shed held tools, an axe, a saw, implements for gardening. Everything was organized, purposeful, the creation of someone who had learned to depend entirely on themselves. But it was what he didn't see that intrigued him most. No shrine to the old gods or the new Christian faith. No tokens of family or friends, no keepsakes or decorations that spoke of a life before this one. It was as if Astrid had appeared in this forest fully formed, with no past to anchor her to the world of men. When she returned with the water, she found him sitting on the chopping stump, breathing heavily from the exertion of his short walk. "You should have waited," she said, but there was no anger in her voice. She set down the buckets and studied him, though I suppose it's a good sign. Your body is remembering how to be strong. "How long have you lived here?" Thorvald asked. "Long enough to know every tree, every path, every hiding place." She paused. 5 years, near enough. "And before that?" "Before that I was someone else." She met his eyes. "As were you, I suspect, before the arrow found you." It was true. The man who had ridden to that ambush, confident in his father's power, certain of his place in the world, felt like a stranger. Now, something about being stripped of armor and weapons, of strength and certainty, had peeled away the layers of who he thought he should be, revealing someone different underneath. "Tell me about the forest," Thorvald said, changing the subject. "You know it well." Astrid's features softened slightly. For the next hour, as they sat in the afternoon sun, she spoke of the woods as another might speak of an old friend. She showed him which mushrooms were safe to eat and which would bring visions or death. She explained how to read the forest, the patterns of moss that indicated north, the tracks that told of deer or wolf or bear, the way birds fell silent when danger approached. "The forest doesn't lie," she said. "It doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. That's restful. Unlike people." "Unlike people," she agreed. As the days continued, Thorvald began to help, with small tasks. He was still too weak for heavy labor, but he could feed the chickens, collect eggs, peel vegetables for the evening meal. Astrid accepted his help without comment, but he noticed she seemed less tense when he was occupied, as if his usefulness somehow justified his continued presence. One evening, as she prepared their meal, Thorvald finally broke the careful silence they had maintained. "You live very far from others." Astrid didn't look up from the bread she was slicing. "I prefer solitude. Most people fear it. I am not most people." "No," Thorvald agreed, watching her carefully. "You're not." She set down the knife and met his gaze. For a moment, something vulnerable passed across her features. Then it was gone, shuttered away behind that calm exterior. "We all have reasons for the lives we choose, Thorvald, son of Bjorn. Mine are my own, as yours are. As yours." It was the closest she had come to acknowledging that they both carried secrets, but there was something else. Something that nagged at Thorvald's warrior instincts. She was too watchful, too careful. When he asked about the nearest village, she spoke vaguely of it being some distance away. When he mentioned finding his way home once he had healed, something flickered across her face. Relief, perhaps, or was it apprehension? Late one night, unable to sleep, Thorvald watched the shadows cast by the dying fire dance across the ceiling. Astrid was asleep on the far side of the room, her breathing deep and even. In repose, her face looked younger, less guarded. He found himself wondering what had driven her to this isolated existence, what ghosts haunted her dreams. And he wondered, with growing unease, why the thought of leaving filled him with something that felt uncomfortably, like regret. That night, as the fire burned low and Astrid slept on the far side of the room, Thorvald lay awake, feeling strength gradually returning to his limbs. Soon, he would be well enough to leave. Soon, he would return to his clan, to his responsibilities, to the weight of his father's legacy. But something in him resisted the thought. Something in him wanted to understand this strange woman who had saved his life and asked for nothing in return. By the second week, Thorvald could stand without dizziness and walk without feeling his legs might give way. The wound was healing cleanly, a testament to Astrid's skill. He began to help with small tasks, splitting wood for the fire, checking the snares she had set for rabbits, repairing a section of the roof that had begun to leak. She accepted his help without comment, as she accepted everything with that same quiet pragmatism that revealed nothing of what lay beneath. The work felt different than training in his father's yard. There was no performance to it, no eyes watching to judge his form or strength. When he split wood, it was because the cottage needed warmth. When he checked the snares, it was because they both needed food. The simplicity of it was strange and oddly satisfying. One afternoon, while repairing the roof, Thorvald found himself talking more freely than he had in years. Perhaps it was the solitude, or perhaps it was because Astrid worked below without judging or interrupting, simply listening as she tended her garden. "My father wants me to be like him," Thorvald said, fitting a new section of thatch into place. "Strong, uncompromising, a leader who rules through respect and fear. But I've seen where that leads. I've seen good men die in feuds that began before they were born. I've seen alliances built on threats rather than trust. And I wonder sometimes if there isn't a better way." "What would a better way look like?" Astrid asked from below. Thorvald paused, considering. "I don't know. That's the problem. I only know what I've been taught. The warrior's way. Take what you can. Defend what you have. Strike before you're struck. But you," he looked down at her, "you live differently. You have no walls, no warriors, no one to defend you. Yet you survive." "Survival isn't the same as living," Astrid said quietly. "I survive. You, in your father's hall. You survive. But are either of us truly living?" The question stayed with Thorvald as he finished the repairs and climbed down. They worked in silence for a while, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when two people have begun to understand each other without need for constant words. But the more time Thorvald spent in her presence, the more questions accumulated like snow before a storm. Why did she flinch, almost imperceptibly, when he mentioned the names of nearby clans? Why did she keep a sword hidden beneath her bed, a warrior's sword, well-maintained despite its age? Why did her hands, sometimes tremble when she thought no one was watching? One afternoon, while Astrid was in the garden, Thorvald found himself studying the few possessions she kept. There was little of personal value. No jewelry, no fine cloth, no tokens of family or friends, but tucked in a wooden chest beneath spare linens he found something that made his blood run cold. A brooch, silver and intricate, bearing the mark of a noble house. He knew that mark. Every warrior in the northern lands knew it. The house of Halfdan, the ruthless. Thorvald's mind raced. Halfdan had been a powerful jarl, cruel and ambitious, who had consolidated his power through marriage alliances and brutal suppression of rival clans. His reign had ended 5 years ago in bloodshed, an uprising of the very people he had oppressed. His entire household had been put to the sword, or so the stories said. 5 years, the same amount of time Astrid had lived in this forest. But perhaps not all of Halfdan's household had perished. Thorvald's hands trembled slightly as he held the brooch. He remembered the stories told in his father's hall. The night Halfdan's compound had burned, flames visible for miles, the bodies piled in the courtyard. The celebration among the clans who had finally overthrown the tyrant. He had been younger then, barely old enough to hold a sword, but he remembered the relief in his father's voice when the news came. One less monster in the world, Bjorn had said. But what of the children, the servants, the innocent members of that household who had no choice in Halfdan's cruelties? When Astrid returned, carrying herbs wrapped in cloth, she found Thorvald standing by the fire, the brooch in his hand. She stopped in the doorway, all colour drained from her face. "Where did you get that?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I should ask you the same question." For a long moment, they stood frozen in a tableau of mutual discovery and mutual fear. Then Astrid set down her bundle very carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile peace between them. "It was my mother's," she said finally. "She was part of that household. And you?" Astrid's jaw tightened. "I was someone else in another life. That life ended when Halfdan's hall burned. You escaped. I survived." The word carried the weight of unspeakable memories. "There is a difference." Thorvald studied her face, seeing now what he had missed before, the bearing beneath the humble clothing, the education in her speech, the reason for her isolation. She was not a simple healer living alone by choice. She was a fugitive, hiding from a past that might yet reach out to claim her. "My father fought Halfdan," Thorvald said slowly. "Many of our warriors died in that conflict. You were part of that world, part of that cruelty. I was a child in that world." Astrid's voice shook with restrained emotion. "I had no choice in the family I was born to, no voice in the decisions that were made. When the end came, I ran because the alternative was death. I came here to disappear, to be forgotten, and I have harmed no one until you saved the life of a warrior who might yet betray your secret." The words hung between them like a blade. Astrid lifted her chin, defiant even in her vulnerability. "Then betray me, if you must. But do not pretend it is justice. It would simply be another act of violence in a world that has known too many." Thorvald looked at the brooch in his hand, then at the woman before him. He thought of the weeks she had spent healing him, asking nothing in return. He thought of the quiet dignity with which she lived her isolated life. He thought of her words about the forest, that it didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. And he thought of justice and what it truly meant. "Tell me what happened," he said finally. "All of it." Thorvald did not betray her. He told himself it was because he owed her his life. He told himself it was because the sins of Halfdan's house should not be visited upon a woman who had been a child when they were committed. He told himself it was pragmatic. He was still healing, still dependent on her shelter and skill. But the truth was more complicated than any of these reasons. The truth was that something had shifted between them in that moment of revelation. The masks they had both worn, hers of the simple hermit, his of the uncomplicated warrior, had fallen away. What remained were two people who had been shaped by violence and loss, trying to carve out some meaning in its aftermath. They spoke more freely after that day, not easily, but honestly. Astrid told him fragments of her past, each one carefully offered like a precious stone pulled from dark water, how she had been raised in privilege, but also in fear, watching her father's cruelty from the gilded cage of his household, how the women of the house walked on eggshells, never knowing when Halfdan's temper might turn violent, how she had learned healing from a thrall named Sigrid, a woman who had been a healer in her own land before, being captured and enslaved. Sigrid was the only kindness I knew in those years, Astrid said one evening as they sat by the fire. She would tend to those my father hurt, and she taught me her craft. I think she knew, somehow, that I would need those skills to survive. What happened to her? She died 2 years before the uprising. Fever took her in the winter. Astrid's voice was soft with old grief. I think part of her was relieved to finally rest. She spoke of the night the uprising came, how she had been in the healing chamber, tending to a servant who had been beaten for some imagined slight. How she had heard the shouts, smelled the smoke, felt the building tremble as men with torches and weapons broke down the gates. I knew what it meant, she said. I had seen enough of my father's victims to know that mercy would not be part of their revenge. So I did what Sigrid had once told me to do if the worst ever came. I ran. She had fled through burning corridors, past bodies of guards and servants alike, the smoke so thick she could barely breathe. She had grabbed only what she could carry, her mother's brooch, a knife, the clothes on her back. She had escaped through a drainage tunnel that led to the river, swimming downstream while the compound burned behind her. I wandered for months, Astrid continued, never staying anywhere long enough to be recognized, trading my healing skills for food and shelter, but always moving on before anyone could ask too many questions, until I found this place, far enough from anyone that rumors wouldn't reach, remote enough that I could simply disappear. And you've been here 5 years, living this half-life, this exile you imposed on yourself. Thorvald shook his head. For what? For being born to the wrong father, for being alive when so many others died, for benefiting, however unwillingly, from my father's cruelty, for not being brave enough to stand against him while he lived. Her voice cracked. I thought if I could help others, if I could use what Sigrid taught me to heal instead of harm, perhaps I could balance some small measure of what my family had done. Perhaps I could deserve to live. The raw honesty in her words struck Thorvald like a physical blow. He found himself sharing his own burdens in return, the weight of his father's expectations, the battles he had fought not from bloodlust, but from duty, the friends he had lost to feuds he didn't truly understand, the growing sense that the warrior's path, the only path he had ever known, might not be the only way to live with honor. My father says that strength is measured in victories, Thorvald said, in enemies defeated, and wealth accumulated, in the respect or fear your name commands. But I have seen strong men do weak things, cruel things. I have seen power wielded without wisdom, strength without compassion, and I have seen, he looked at Astrid, I have seen a woman with more courage than any warrior I know, living alone to atone for sins that were never hers. That's not courage, Astrid replied softly. That's just survival. Courage would have been staying, fighting against my father while he lived, trying to change things instead of running away. You were a child. What could you have done? I don't know, but I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if there was something, anything. In the days that followed, something neither of them had anticipated began to grow between them. It started with shared silences that were comfortable rather than tense, with small gestures, Thorvald bringing her the first snow hare of the season, already cleaned and prepared. Astrid mending his travelling cloak with careful stitches, reinforcing the tiers so they would hold against winter winds. With conversations that stretched late into the night, their voices low so as not to disturb the peace that had settled over the cottage like the first snow. They fell into an easy rhythm. Thorvald would rise early to tend the fire and check the snares. Astrid would prepare breakfast while he gathered water from the stream. They would work through the day, gathering firewood, preserving food for winter, making repairs to the cottage, moving around each other with the unconscious coordination of long familiarity. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire. Sometimes Astrid would teach him about herbs and healing, showing him which plants stanched bleeding, which drew out infection, which eased pain, or brought sleep. Sometimes Thorvald would tell her stories of his travels, of the lands he had seen and the people he had met, carefully editing out the violence that had accompanied most of those journeys. One night, during a fierce autumn storm, they sat closer than usual to the fire, watching, rain hammer against the shuttered windows. The cottage felt like a small island of warmth and safety in a wild, dark world. "I should leave soon," Thorvald said, though the words felt heavy in his mouth. "The wound is healed. I'm strong enough to travel. My father's men may still be searching, or they may have given me up for dead. Either way, I need to return to your father's hall, to your responsibilities." Astrid's voice was carefully neutral. "Yes, and your betrothal." Thorvald blinked. "How did you know about that? You talk in your sleep sometimes. You mentioned a name. Ylva." Astrid kept her eyes on the fire. "I assume she's waiting for you. It's an arranged match, an alliance between houses." Thorvald ran a hand through his hair. "I've met her twice. She's young, kind enough, I suppose. But it's not—" He stopped, uncertain how to finish the sentence. "Not what?" Astrid prompted quietly. "Not real. It's strategy disguised as marriage. A joining of lands and power, with no consideration for anything else. That's how it's done in your world. Marriages are alliances. Love, if it comes at all, comes later, if you're fortunate. And if you're not fortunate, then you learn to live with duty instead of happiness. It's not so different from what I've been doing." Astrid finally looked at him. "We all have our cages, Thorvald. Some are just more obvious than others." The truth of it hung between them. She was caged by her past, by the need for secrecy and isolation. He was caged by his future, by expectations and obligations he had never chosen. "What if I didn't go back?" The words escaped before Thorvald could stop them. "What if I stayed here?" Astrid's expression was unreadable. "And do what? Hide in the forest with me? Pretend the world beyond, these trees, doesn't exist? Would that be so terrible? It would be a lie, and neither of us is built for living lies, no matter how comfortable they might be." She reached out, her hand hovering near his for a moment before she drew it back. "You have a life waiting for you, people who depend on you. A legacy to fulfill or transform. I won't be the reason you abandon that. And if I want to, then you're not the man I thought you were." The words stung, but Thorvald recognized the truth in them. Running away, hiding from his responsibilities, that wouldn't solve anything. It would just be another form of the cowardice Astrid had spent 5 years trying to atone for. But the thought of leaving, of returning to his father's hall and the life that awaited him there, filled him with a hollowness that had nothing to do with hunger. Thorvald found himself dreading the day when he would be healed enough to leave. And Astrid found herself hoping, against all wisdom and experience, that perhaps he might stay, even though she knew, with the certainty of someone who had already lost everything once, that hope was a dangerous thing to carry. But both of them knew that the world beyond the forest had not forgotten them, and sooner or later it would come calling. The riders came on a morning wrapped in fog. Thorvald heard them before he saw them, the thunder of hooves on the forest path, the jingle of harnesses, the voices of men calling to one another. He was outside, checking Astrid's traps when the sound reached him. Every instinct, honed by years of warfare, screamed a warning. He ran for the cottage, bursting through the door to find Astrid already on her feet, her face pale but composed. "Riders," he said. "Coming this way." "How many?" "At least 5, maybe more." Astrid moved quickly, gathering certain items: dried meat, a water skin, her mother's brooch. Her hands were steady, but Thorvald could see the fear in her eyes. This was the moment she had been living in dread of for 5 years. "There's a root cellar," she said, "behind the woodpile. If they're looking for me, they're not looking for you." Thorvald gripped her shoulders, making her meet his eyes. "They're my father's men. They must have been searching for survivors from the ambush. They're looking for me." Relief and new concern warred across her features. "Then you should go to them. Your father must be— If they see you, they'll ask questions. And if they ask the right questions—" He didn't need to finish the thought. The horses were closer now, voices clear enough to make out words. Should have died in that ambush. The old man's beside himself. Waste of time. Searching this far. Astrid made a decision. Go to them. Tell them you were found by a hunter who brought you here to heal. Tell them I'm a widower who lives alone. Tell them anything, but don't let them look too closely. Astrid, go! She pushed him toward the door. If they see us together. Like this, if they see me frightened, they'll know something is wrong. You owe me your life, Thorvald, son of Bjorn. Now I'm asking you to pay that debt. Protect my secret. As fate turns against our hero, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Let's see how far these voices can travel. Thorvald stepped outside just as the riders emerged from the fog like ghosts taking solid form. 6 men, all bearing his father's colors. At their head was Ragnar, his father's captain, a grizzled warrior who had taught Thorvald to hold his first sword. Thorvald! Ragnar's voice cracked with emotion. He dismounted in a single fluid movement and strode forward, gripping Thorvald's shoulders. By all the gods, boy, we thought you dead. Nearly was. Thorvald forced a smile, aware of Astrid watching from the cottage window. An arrow that should have killed me, but fate, it seems, had other plans. Ragnar's eyes swept over the cottage, the small clearing, the signs of habitation. Who dwells here? Who tended your wounds? A hunter, a man named... Thorvald's mind raced. Odd. His wife healed me. They asked no payment, sought no reward. One of the other riders had dismounted and was walking toward the cottage. Thorvald's heart hammered against his ribs, but he kept his expression neutral. Is the healer within? The rider called. The Jarl would want to reward such service. The door opened. Astrid stepped out, and Thorvald's breath caught. She had transformed herself in seconds. Shoulders slumped, eyes downcast, the very picture of a humble peasant woman greeting her betters. All the intelligence and strength he had come to know was hidden beneath a mask of servile deference. "My lords," she said, her voice softer, less educated than he had ever heard it. "I did only what any Christian soul would do for an injured man." Christian, the word was deliberate. Many of the old families still clung to the new religion, while warriors like his father honored the old gods. It created a divide, a reason for distance. Ragnar nodded curtly. "Your kindness will be remembered. Tell your husband he may call upon the house of Bjorn the Ironhand if he has need. You are generous, lord." Astrid bowed her head. "My husband is in the forest, checking his traplines. He will be honored to hear of your gratitude." It was a perfect lie, delivered without hesitation. The rider who had approached lost interest and returned to his horse. But Ragnar was watching Thorvald with eyes that had seen too many battles to be easily fooled. "Your father waits, Thorvald. He has mourned you these weeks. It's time to come home." Home. The word felt foreign in his mouth. Thorvald glanced back at the cottage, at Astrid standing in the doorway. In that moment he realized that this place, this simple dwelling in the forest, had become more of a home than his father's hall had ever been. But duty called, and honor demanded an answer. "I'll gather my things," he said. The ride back to his father's hall took 2 days. Thorvald spent them in silence, ignoring Ragnar's attempts at conversation, replaying over and over the moment when he had left Astrid standing in the doorway. She had said nothing. Their eyes had met for a single heartbeat, and in that glance he had seen everything neither of them had dared to speak aloud. The landscape changed as they rode. The wild forest gave way to cultivated fields, small homesteads, the ordered world of men. With each mile, Thorvald felt the weight of his responsibilities settling back onto his shoulders like armor that had grown too heavy to bear. Ragnar rode beside him, his weathered face thoughtful. The old warrior had taught Thorvald to hold his first sword, to read the patterns of battle, to understand that warfare was as much about strategy as strength. He had also taught him to read people, which was perhaps why he remained silent for most of the journey, giving Thorvald space to wrestle with whatever demons he carried. But as they crested the final hill and his father's hall came into view, Ragnar finally spoke. "The healer woman, she meant something to you." It was not a question. Thorvald said nothing. But his silence was answer enough. "Your father has been making plans. Ragnar continued carefully. The betrothal to Ylva has been formalized. The wedding is set for spring. It's a good match, Thorvald. It will bring peace to lands that have bled too long. I know. Do you? Ragnar's voice was gentle but firm. Because I've seen that look before, on young warriors who've had their first taste of something beyond duty and responsibility. It's intoxicating, dangerous, and it can lead good men to make very bad choices. Thorvald turned to look at the old warrior. What if the choices we're making now are the bad ones? What if this endless cycle of alliances and feuds and arranged marriages is what keeps us locked in violence? Perhaps, but one man can't change centuries of tradition by walking away from his obligations. Ragnar paused. Though one man might be able to change it by fulfilling those obligations differently, by being a different kind of leader than his father. The hall of Bjorn the Ironhand rose against the grey sky like a monument to strength and endurance. It was built of dark timber and stone, sprawling and fortified, with shields mounted along. The walls and the bones of past victories displayed for all to see. Thorvald had grown up within these walls, trained in their courtyards, listened to saga singers recount the glories of his ancestors in their great hall. Now it felt like a prison. His father met him at the gates. Bjorn the Ironhand was a mountain of a man, even in his 6th decade, with a beard shot through with grey and eyes like winter ice. He clasped Thorvald to his chest with arms that could still break a man's ribs, then held him at arm's length to study his face. "I thought I'd lost you," Bjorn said, and for a moment his voice was thick with emotion. Then the moment passed, and the Jarl's face hardened. "The ambush was treachery. We know who betrayed us. There will be blood payment. More blood. More feuds. The eternal cycle. Father, I need to speak with you about..." "Later," Bjorn clapped him on the shoulder. "Tonight we feast your return. Let the hall see that the son of Bjorn cannot be so easily killed." The feast was everything Thorvald had once found exhilarating. The roar of voices, the clash of cups, the warmth of the fire pit, and the closeness of brothers in arms. Warriors he had grown up with embraced him, congratulated him on his survival, pressed mead into his hands. Women smiled at him from across the hall, some with welcome, others with calculation. His father presided over it all from his high seat, pride evident in every gesture. But Thorvald's mind was in a cottage in the forest, with a woman who wore her loneliness like armor and her courage like a quiet prayer. The hall was packed with bodies, the air thick with smoke and sweat and spilled mead. Thorvald sat at his father's right hand, the position of the heir, and felt utterly alone. The conversations around him seemed hollow, boasts about past battles, plans for future raids, gossip about alliances and betrayals. Had it always been this way? Had he simply never noticed before? Near midnight, when the celebration had reached its height, Ragnar sat down beside him. "Something troubles you," the old warrior said. It was not a question. Thorvald took a long drink from his cup. "Just the lingering effects of the wound. I've known you since you were a boy trying to lift your father's sword. Don't insult me with lies." Ragnar's voice was low, meant only for Thorvald's ears. "What happened in that forest cottage?" For a wild moment Thorvald considered telling him everything. Ragnar was more than his father's captain. He had been like an uncle to Thorvald, teaching him not just warfare, but wisdom. But even Ragnar's loyalty had limits. Even Ragnar would not keep a secret that might endanger the Jarl's son. "I found something I didn't expect to find," Thorvald said finally. "A different way of living, a different kind of strength." Ragnar studied him for a long moment. This healer woman, she was not married, was she? Thorvald's silence was answer enough. "Be careful, boy. Your father has plans for you. An alliance with the House of Steiner, sealed with a marriage to his daughter Ylva. It would unite two powerful clans, bring peace to lands that have known too much conflict." "I've met Ylva," Thorvald said flatly. "She's a child. She's 16 summers, old enough to wed, and she'll grow into a fine woman and a strong mother to your children." Ragnar leaned closer. "Whatever you found in that forest, whatever you felt, set it aside. You are the heir to a great house. Your life is not your own to spend on whims and fancies. But that was exactly the problem. His life had never been his own. Every choice made for him, every path laid out before he could even consider alternatives, until he had lain wounded and helpless in a stranger's care and learned that there were forms of courage that had nothing to do with the sword. "What if I don't want this life?" Thorvald asked quietly. Ragnar's expression softened. "Then you're braver than most men. But want and duty are different things. We don't always get to choose which one we serve." That night, Thorvald lay in his chamber, a room that had been his since childhood but felt foreign now. The bed was too soft after weeks on straw and furs, the walls too close after the openness of the forest. He stared at the ceiling and thought of Astrid, alone in her cottage, probably believing she would never see him again. And he wondered if Ragnar was right, if the only way forward was to accept duty and let go of what might have been. 3 weeks passed in his father's hall, and each day Thorvald felt the weight of expectation pressing down upon him like a stone. His father announced the betrothal to Ylva during a gathering of allied jarls. She stood beside him on the dais, a pretty girl with blonde braids and nervous eyes, who smiled dutifully when she was supposed to and said nothing of substance. She was not unkind. She was simply young, unformed, a vessel waiting to be filled with whatever her husband and her household required of her. She was nothing like Astrid. The wedding was set for the spring, when travel would be easier and the gathered clans could celebrate properly. Until then, Thorvald was expected to perform his duties as heir, settling disputes, training younger warriors, representing his father in councils and negotiations. He did all of it mechanically, his body present while his mind wandered the forest paths. At night, he lay awake in his chamber and wondered what Astrid was doing. Was she safe? Did she think of him? Had she perhaps felt relief when he left, glad to return to her solitude? Or did she lie awake as well, staring at the shadows cast by her fire, wondering if what had grown between them had been real or simply the natural result of proximity and circumstance? The answer came on a frost-hard morning in late autumn. Thorvald was in the training yard, working through sword forms to keep his newly healed body strong, when a commotion erupted at the gates. Riders had arrived, not warriors but merchants from a village 2 days' travel to the north, and they brought news that turned Thorvald's blood to ice. "Raiders!" the lead merchant was saying to Bjorn, his words tumbling over each other in fear. "They came in the night, burned 3 homesteads. They're moving south, taking what they can, killing any who resist. The Jarl of those lands has called for aid." "How many?" Bjorn demanded. 20 men, perhaps more. They're well armed and vicious. They seem to be searching for something, or someone." Thorvald's sword fell from his hand with a clatter. He knew, with sudden terrible certainty, what those raiders were searching for, or rather who. Astrid's past had finally caught up to her. Someone, a survivor of Halfdan's household, a former ally seeking revenge or leverage, had learned that one member of that hated family still lived, and they were burning their way through the forest to find her. Thorvald was moving before thought could catch up with instinct. He grabbed his sword, his axe, his traveling pack. Ragnar caught his arm. "Where do you think you're going? I have to warn her." "Her?" Ragnar's eyes widened. "The healer? Thorvald? You barely know the woman. You can't—" "I know enough," Thorvald shook off his grip, "and I won't let her die for sins that weren't hers. Your father will not permit—" "Then he'll have to stop me." But Bjorn had heard the exchange. He strode over, his face like thunder. "Explain, now." There was no time for careful explanations or half-truths. Thorvald told him everything: who Astrid was, why she hid, why raiders might be hunting her, and why he had to reach her before they did. His father listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When Thorvald finished, Bjorn was quiet for a long moment. "You would risk everything for this woman," he said finally. "Your position, your betrothal, perhaps your life." "Yes." "Why?" It was the simplest question and the hardest to answer. "Because she saved me. Because she showed me a different way to be strong. Because in her presence I felt more myself than I ever have in this hall. because when I left her standing in that doorway, I left part of myself behind. But what Thorvald said was simpler and more true than all of those reasons. Because it's right. Bjorn stared at his son for a long moment. Then, incredibly, his stern features softened into something almost like pride. Ragnar, take 12 men. Ride with my son. If these raiders want blood, give them a battle they won't forget. They rode hard through the autumn forest, pushing the horses to the edge of endurance. Thorvald led them by the shortest paths, the ones he had learned during his weeks of recovery, when Astrid had sent him to check distant snares, and he had mapped the land in his mind. The sun was past its zenith when they saw the first sign of the raiders' passage, a burned homestead still smoking, its occupants fled or dead. "We're behind them," Ragnar said grimly. "Maybe half a day. Then we ride faster." They pushed on through the failing light. Thorvald's healing wound ached with every jarring impact, but he ignored it. All that mattered was reaching Astrid before the raiders did. Night was falling when they smelled smoke on the wind. Thorvald's heart clenched. They crested a ridge and saw it, flames rising above the trees in the distance, right where Astrid's cottage stood. But the fire was too large for a simple dwelling. The raiders had torched the forest itself, creating a wall of flame to flush out anyone hiding within. "We'll never get through that," one of the warriors said. But Thorvald was already dismounting, already moving. "There's a stream that runs near her cottage. The ground will be too wet to burn quickly. If we follow it, we could be trapped between fire and raiders," Ragnar said. But he was dismounting too, readying his weapons. "Lead the way." They left the horses and went on foot, moving through smoke that stung their eyes and burned their lungs. The stream was exactly where Thorvald remembered, its banks muddy and dark. They followed it deeper into the burning forest, the heat intense on their faces, ash falling like black snow. And then they heard it, the sound of steel on steel, the shouts of men in combat. Thorvald burst into the clearing where Astrid's cottage had stood. The building was engulfed in flames, the thatch roof collapsing in showers of sparks. But in front of it, illuminated by that terrible light, was a scene from a nightmare. Astrid stood with her back to the blazing cottage, her father's old sword in her hands, facing 3 raiders. Bodies lay at her feet. She had already killed 2 before Thorvald arrived, but she was wounded, blood streaming from a cut on her arm, and the raiders were circling her like wolves, laughing as they closed in. "The little bird has claws," one of them mocked. "But it won't save you, daughter of Halfdan. Your father's crimes." He never finished the sentence. Thorvald's axe took him in the back, dropping him instantly. The other raiders whirled, and then Ragnar and the others were pouring into the clearing, and the night became chaos. The fight was brief but brutal. The raiders, caught between the fire and warriors they hadn't expected, broke quickly. Some fled into the burning forest. Others fell to Thorvald's men. Within minutes, it was over. Thorvald ran to Astrid. She was swaying on her feet, the sword still raised, her eyes wide with shock and exhaustion. When she saw him, something broke in her expression. Relief, disbelief, a dozen emotions all at once. "You came," she whispered. "Did you think I wouldn't?" The sword fell from her hands. She collapsed forward, and Thorvald caught her, holding her against his chest as the cottage burned behind them and his father's men secured the clearing. "I've lost everything," Astrid said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "My home, my peace, everything I built." "Not everything." Thorvald pulled back to look at her face. Soot-stained and tear-marked, and more beautiful than anything in his father's hall. Not everything. They made camp at a safe distance from the fire, waiting for dawn and the smoke to clear. Ragnar posted guards and tended the wounded. Astrid's arm required fresh stitching, which she did herself with steady hands, while Thorvald held a torch for light. The other warriors watched her with a mixture of respect and uncertainty. This woman was enemy blood, but she had fought with courage, and their Jarl's son clearly cared for her. 2 of the raiders had survived the fight and been taken prisoner. Ragnar questioned them, while Astrid worked on her wound, her face pale but composed. Thorvald could hear fragments of the interrogation. "Hired to find the daughter of Halfdan. Someone in the south wants her dead. or wants proof she's dead. Didn't know she could fight like that. So it was, as they had feared. Someone who remembered Halfdan's household had decided that all debts must be paid, all bloodlines ended. The hunt wouldn't stop with these raiders. There would be others, unless something changed. As the night deepened and the others slept, Thorvald and Astrid sat together near the fire, wrapped in borrowed cloaks, not touching, but close enough to share warmth. Astrid's wounded arm was bound in fresh linen, and exhaustion lined her face, but her eyes were clear. "They'll keep looking," Astrid said quietly. "Someone betrayed my location once. They'll do it again. There's no sanctuary for me, Thorvald. Not anywhere. I can't keep running forever. And I can't keep rebuilding only to lose everything again. Then don't hide anymore." She looked at him as if he'd gone mad. "What are you suggesting? Come back with me, to my father's hall." "Thorvald, I can't. Your father would never, the people would never accept. My father respects courage, and you have more of it than half the warriors in his service." Thorvald took her hand, feeling the calluses from years of work, the strength in her fingers. "Yes, you were born into Halfdan's house, but you are not your father's sins. You saved my life. You've lived with honor in exile. You fought tonight not from hatred, but from the simple desire to survive. Let me give you what you gave me: shelter, healing, a chance to live. And your betrothal, the alliance your father has arranged, the girl who's waiting to become your wife." Astrid's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't just walk away from that. It's not only your life you'd be disrupting." Thorvald was quiet for a moment. He thought of Ylva, innocent and dutiful, who deserved a husband who could love her, not one whose heart belonged elsewhere. He thought of his father's plans, the political web of alliances and obligations. He thought of the life that had been laid out for him since birth, the path of least resistance, the expected course, the way things had always been done. Then he thought of the weeks in the forest cottage, the conversations by firelight, the peace he had found in simply being rather than performing, the way Astrid looked at him, not as an heir or a warrior or a political piece to be moved on a board, but simply as a man who could choose if he was brave enough. "Some prices," he said slowly, "are too high to pay, even for peace, especially for peace built on foundations of unhappiness and duty without choice." Astrid's eyes glistened in the firelight. "You would give up everything for me? Your position, your security, your father's approval?" "No," Thorvald squeezed her hand. "I would give up a future I never wanted for a chance at one I do. There's a difference. I'm not sacrificing anything real. I'm trading a comfortable prison for an uncertain freedom. And if I've learned anything from you, it's that freedom, real freedom, the kind that lets you choose who you want to be, is worth almost any price. Your father might disown you. He might, or he might surprise us both." Thorvald thought of the moment in the courtyard, the unexpected permission to ride to her rescue. "My father is many things, but he's not blind. He sees that the old ways, the endless feuds, the arranged marriages, the alliances built on fear, haven't brought lasting peace. Perhaps he's ready for something different, or perhaps he'll rage and cast me out. Either way, I'm willing to face those consequences." Astrid was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid, Thorvald. I've spent 5 years hiding, running, trying to disappear. The thought of stepping back into the world, of facing people who might recognize me, who might hate me for my father's crimes, it terrifies me. I know, but you won't be alone this time. You'll have me. And perhaps, if we're fortunate, you'll have my father's protection as well. The house of Bjorn is not without influence. Under our banner, you would be far harder to hunt. And if I bring danger to your house, if more raiders come seeking me, then we'll face them together." Thorvald smiled slightly. "You fought off 3 armed men tonight with a blade you probably haven't touched in years. I think we can handle whatever comes." Astrid laughed, a short, surprised sound that was almost a sob. "You're insane." "Possibly, but I'd rather be insane and happy than sane and slowly dying inside." He pulled her closer, his arm around her shoulders. "Come with me, not because you owe me, not out of gratitude or fear, but because you want to, because maybe, just maybe, we could build something real together, something that's ours, not handed down by tradition or forged from obligation. She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and for a long moment they simply sat in silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Around them, the camp was quiet, except for the soft snores of sleeping warriors and the occasional crack of a settling log. "What about Ylva?" Astrid asked finally. "The girl you're betrothed to. I'll speak with her, and with her father. It will be difficult, possibly disastrous for the alliance. But Ylva deserves honesty. At the very least, she deserves a chance to find someone who can love her properly, not someone whose heart is already given." He paused. "She's young, but she's wise enough to understand that a marriage without affection benefits no one. You have more faith in people's understanding than I do. Perhaps. Or perhaps I've just learned from someone who chose conscience over comfort, truth over convenience." He looked down at her. "You taught me that, Astrid, by the way you've lived these past 5 years, by choosing to heal me when you could have let me die, by facing those raiders tonight. Instead of running, you taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to do the right thing despite it." Astrid was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, she nodded. "All right, I'll come with you. Not because I think it will be easy or safe or even successful, but because for the first time in 5 years, I don't want to run anymore. I want to face what comes with you." Thorvald felt something in his chest loosen, a tension he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. He kissed her forehead, a gentle gesture that promised protection and partnership in equal measure. Then, "Rest. Tomorrow we ride home, and whatever comes after, we'll face it together." She looked at him as if he'd gone mad. "What are you suggesting?" "Come back with me, to my father's hall." "Thorvald, I can't. Your father would never." "My father respects courage, and you have more of it than half the warriors in his service." Thorvald took her hand, feeling the calluses from years of work, the strength in her fingers. "Yes, you were born into Halfdan's house, but you are not your father's sins. You saved my life. You've lived with honor in exile. Let me give you what you gave me: shelter, healing, a chance to live. And your betrothal, the alliance your father has arranged?" Thorvald was quiet for a moment. He thought of Ylva, innocent and dutiful, who deserved a husband who could love her, not one whose heart belonged elsewhere. He thought of his father's plans, the political web of alliances and obligations. He thought of the life that had been laid out for him since birth. Then he thought of the weeks in the forest cottage, the conversations by firelight, the peace he had found in simply being rather than performing. The way Astrid looked at him, not as an heir or a warrior or a political piece to be moved on a board, but simply as a man. "Some prices," he said slowly, "are too high to pay, even for peace." Astrid's eyes glistened in the firelight. "You would give up everything for me?" "No." Thorvald squeezed her hand. "I would give up a future I never wanted. For a chance at one, I do." The confrontation with Bjorn the Ironhand came 3 days later, in the great hall, before the assembled warriors and allies. Thorvald stood before his father's high seat with Astrid at his side. She wore simple clothing still, but she stood straight, her head high, every inch the noble woman she had been born to be. The hall was silent, waiting to see how the Jarl would respond to his son's defiance. Bjorn studied them both for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "My son tells me he will not wed the daughter of Steiner. That he chooses instead this woman, born to the house of a tyrant, living in exile under a false name." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Thorvald felt Astrid tense beside him, but neither of them looked away from Bjorn's penetrating gaze. "He tells me," Bjorn continued, "that she saved his life, that she has lived these 5 years with honor, harming no one, helping any who needed aid, that she fought against raiders who would have killed her for the crimes of her father, and that she has taught him something I could not. That strength is not only measured in victories, but in how we treat those who are powerless." Bjorn stood, and the hall fell completely silent. "I have built my legacy on strength, on conquest and alliance, and the fear my name brings to my enemies. but I have seen strong men become tyrants. I have seen alliances built on fear crumble like rotten wood, and I have watched my son grow from a boy who followed duty blindly into a man who questions what duty truly means. He stepped down from the dais and approached them. Astrid's hand found Thorvald's, gripping tightly. "Astrid, daughter of Halfdan," Bjorn said, "you are not responsible for your father's cruelty, but the choice you make now will define who you are. Will you hide from your past forever, or will you face it, bear its weight, and prove that one person can break the cycle of violence and vengeance?" Astrid's voice was steady when she answered, "I cannot undo what my father did, Lord Bjorn, but I can spend my life trying to balance it. I can heal instead of harm, build instead of destroy, and if you give me the chance, I will prove that I am worthy of the shelter your son offers." Bjorn nodded slowly. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the hall. He removed his own silver armring, a symbol of his favor and protection, and held it out to Astrid. "Then prove it, not to me, but to yourself. Wear this as a sign that you are under the protection of my house. Let anyone who would punish you for your father's sins know they must go through me first." Astrid took the armring with trembling hands, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Bjorn turned to his son. "As for you, the alliance with Steiner's house is ended. You have made your choice, and I will respect it. But understand this, you will have to work twice as hard to prove your worth now, not as my heir, but as a leader who walks a different path than his father." "I understand," Thorvald said. "Good." A hint of a smile crossed Bjorn's weathered face. "Because you'll need her skills. We're founding a healing house, open to all, warrior and farmer, ally and enemy. Your woman will run it, and you will defend it." Let it be said that Bjorn the Ironhand's legacy was not just strength, but also mercy. The hall erupted in stunned conversation, but Thorvald heard none of it. He was looking at Astrid, seeing the weight of 5 years of fear and loneliness finally lifting from her shoulders. She turned to him, and in her eyes he saw not gratitude, but something deeper: partnership, understanding, love that had grown in the quiet spaces between words. That night, as the feast celebrating their union began, they slipped away to the battlements. The stars were brilliant overhead, cold and distant and eternal. Below them, the hall blazed with firelight and music. "Do you regret it?" Astrid asked quietly. "Giving up the life you were meant to have?" Thorvald pulled her close, feeling her warmth against the autumn chill. "I gave up the life others chose for me. I'm building the one I choose for myself, with a woman haunted by a dark past. With a woman who faced that darkness and emerged into light." He kissed her forehead. "We all carry scars, Astrid. Yours are just more visible than most, but scars mean we survived. And survival means we get to choose what comes next." She was quiet for a moment, then smiled, a real smile, free and unguarded in a way he had never seen before. "Then let's choose wisely," she said, and as the stars wheeled overhead and the feast sang below, they stood together on the battlements. Two people who had been shaped by violence and loss, but who refused to let those things define them, who chose instead to build something new from the ashes of their past. The healing house they founded became known throughout the northern lands, a place where wounds of body and spirit were tended with equal care, where old enemies could find shelter beside former allies, where the daughter of a tyrant proved that one person, making one choice at a time, could change the story they were born into. And in the years that followed, when saga singers told the tale of Thorvald and Astrid, they spoke not of battles won or wealth accumulated, but of a different kind of victory: the courage to choose love over duty, mercy over vengeance, and the difficult hope that tomorrow might be better than yesterday. If this journey moved you, leave a like, subscribe, and share in the comments what touched you the most. Your voice keeps these legends alive. Some legacies are written in blood, but the greatest ones are written in the choices we make when no one is watching, in the mercy we show when vengeance would be easier, and in the love we build from the ruins of what came before. This is the story of a wounded Viking who found more than shelter in a stranger's home. He found a truth that no saga had ever taught him, that the strongest warriors are not those who never fall, but those who rise, help others rise, and choose to build rather than destroy. And that sometimes the greatest act of courage is not wielding a sword, but setting it down.